Well, welcome to the Book of Esther. This is going to be a really fun book to read. A couple important things to understand about this Book of Esther. One is, of course, we're in the Second Temple period, like we've talked about in the previous chapters with Ezra and Nehemiah. But the thing to understand is there is extremely few books of ancient scripture that are written about women, let alone named for a woman. This is one of them. Ruth is another one. And we've already talked about her book. So there's a lot of extreme value we get from these books that is so important for us because they're rare. They're so few to get more of a woman's perspective of things. So a lot of great things we get to learn, a lot of things that unfortunately haven't changed in some ways, and some things that have changed since then. So the beauty of this is understanding women's experience with scripture gives us another perspective of what's going on and an opportunity to learn in a more holistic way of what's happening. So because women will sometimes experience things in a different way than men, and so getting both opinions is very, very important. So this is a nice glimpse into some opportunities to help us learn things about the gospel that we probably wouldn't learn without a woman's perspective being a part of it. So I hope in the future that archaeologists can find more ancient writings about the life of women that we can learn from and work with. But we're unfortunately limited on that just because of the nature of what was important in history. Basically, there's a lot of perspectives that we don't have because most of history is written by kings and rulers and wealthy people, and not the average person that much. So some interesting things that we get to learn in this book. So to put a little perspective in this, the Book of Esther this was taking place in Susa, I believe is how you'd pronounce it. It's basically southwest Iran is about where this took place. So if you think of the country of Iran, southwest Iran, that's where we're talking about basically. It's an ancient Persian city. So this is still the Persian Empire that we're dealing with. Remember, the Jews have been heading back to Jerusalem, building Jerusalem, rebuilding, I should say, and doing those things. They believe that in the Persian tongue, Esther's name means star. So there's a lot of symbolism that we're going to see in that as we go through these chapters. So think of what stands out in your mind as we go through these chapters in the Book of Esther, and ask yourself, how does that symbolism of star seem to shine forward or come forth as you do that? I'd love to see that in the notes as we go through these videos here. So in this chapter, we're going to get started here. Verse 1, now it came to pass in the days of Ahasuerus, this is Ahasuerus which reigned from India even unto Ethiopia, over 120 provinces, and 120 provinces. So if you think about India, where India is today, all the way to Ethiopia, which is south of Egypt, that's a big area. They've taken over a massive amount of area, one of the largest kingdoms known in history, at least up to that point, basically. So some really interesting things there. Now, when we start to read this, a lot of people say, well, who's this Ahasuerus person? I don't remember hearing that name in history. There's a reason for that. One of the things about this is the more Hebrew version of the king of Persia's name. Okay, so sometimes it gets used and in place of the name of several different kings of Persia. So we always have to think about what's our time frame and where are we at to try to line up which king of Persia does this stand for. Most likely this refers to Xerxes. So if you remember, Xerxes is the king of Persia that was after Darius, and then there was another king, and then there was Cyrus, and then Xerxes was after him. Xerxes was also the one with the Battle of 300, the Battle of Thermopylae, and then Artaxerxes, who we learned about in Nehemiah, is after Xerxes. That's Xerxes' son, if I remember correctly. So that is so. I don't know if I can pronounce the real king's name. The name is a Hebrew transliteration of the Persian Khsyayarsha, better known in history as Xerxes. Xerxes is the Greek form of his real name. That's not the Persian form. They didn't call him Xerxes. They called him Khsyayarsha, something like that. But in Greek, it would be Xerxes, and that's what most of us know them as, because a lot of ancient history was based on the Greeks, and they're collecting history from other nations and then translating it into their language, and then that's where they get it from, basically. So they believe that the Book of Esther took place around 482 to 478 BC. So right in that area there, the 480s, basically BC is where it was. Interestingly enough, about the Book of Esther is, if you remember, sometimes we'll hear about Joseph Smith offering some improvements, or not improvements, but some adjustments to the wording that he went through. The Book of Esther is one of the few books in the scriptures, the Bible, that Joseph Smith didn't find anything. He didn't change anything in the Book of Esther, so really interesting. There's no revisions in the JST basically here. Okay, so let's talk verse 2, that in those days when the king Ahasuerus, or Xerxes, sat on the throne of his kingdom, which was in Shushan the palace, in the 3rd year of his reign, he made a feast unto all his princes and his servants. The power of Persia and Media, the nobles and princes of the provinces, being before him. When he showed the riches of his glorious kingdom and the honor of his excellent majesty many days, even 180 days. So this is a big feast. They didn't have TV and Hollywood and entertainment, so putting on feasts for people was a big deal, especially for the wealthy, because they could. They didn't have to go work in the fields all day long. So they would put this feast on, bring all the wealthy people in, all the powerful people in, have this big feast. This was not an uncommon thing. Verse 5, when these days were expired, the king made a feast unto all the people that were present in Shushan the palace, both unto great and small, 7 days in the court of the garden of the king's palace. So this is another one. So the first feast that they talked about went 104 days, basically, and it was to show off the riches of his kingdom and to kind of tell everybody, look at how mighty of a person I am, how amazing this is, the spoils of war, those kinds of things brought together. Then he did another feast, and this was for more of the people in his palace, basically. And so verse 6, where were white, green, and blue hangings fastened with cords of fine linen, and purple to silver rings, and pillars of marble. The beds were of gold and silver upon a pavement of red, blue, and white, and black marble. So you can tell lots of different colors of marble, rock, gold, and silver things. Very opulent, very wealthy location they put this in, basically. Verse 7, and they gave them drink in vessels of gold, the vessels being diverse one from another, the royal wine in abundance according to the state of the king. And the drinking was according to the law, none did compel. For so the king had appointed to all the officers of his house that they should do according to every man's pleasure. So there's the bringing the wine out to drink was extremely common for these parties as well, and they were basically, if they didn't want to drink, they didn't have to drink. They weren't compelled to drink. If they wanted to drink, they could pretty much drink almost as much as they wanted. Basically, it was pretty crazy. Now, verse 9, also Vashti, the queen, made a feast for the women in the royal house which belonged to King Ahasuerus. So this might sound strange, that the queen is having a feast and a party with the women, and the king is having a feast and a party with the men. Not uncommon, actually, back then, to not intermingle. Sometimes parties would intermingle, and sometimes they would not. There's different factors that go into that. But she's off having her own party with the women, basically. Probably less drinking and a lot more talking, collaborative communications, things like that happen. Is probably more. That was probably more an important meeting than actually the men meeting, really. Verse 10, on the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine. So he's been drinking for 7 days. So he's pretty out of it, probably. He commanded Mehuman, Biztha, Harbana, Bigtha, and Abagtha, Zethar, and Sarkas, I'm assuming that's how it says, the 7 chamberlains that served in the presence of Ahasuerus to the king. So these are the 7 women that serve the king and help him out. He's asked all them to come together, and he says, verse 11, to bring Vashti the queen before the king with the crown royal, to show the people and the princes her beauty, for she was fair to look on. So the king's like, bring my wife in, put the crown on her head, bring her in. I want to show off how beautiful my wife is and how amazing this is. He's 7 days of drinking. He's very inebriated. He's out of it. And he wants to bring her in and parade her in front of all the men to show off the amazing beauty that she has. And so this would be, I'd like to get, especially if you are a woman, your perspective of this. If you were Queen Vashti, would you do this, or would you follow would you do what she does, or would you comply with what the king said? Because there was a law that you should comply with the king. So we're going to run into some challenges here, because in verse 12, but the queen Vashti refused to come at the king's commandment by his chamberlains. Therefore was the king very wroth, and his anger burned in him. So she didn't want to do this, most likely because she would probably be not, I wouldn't say humiliated, but I think, and ladies, please chime in on this in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. What would it feel like to you if you were paraded in front of a bunch of drunken men simply because of your looks? Would that honor you? Would you feel respected by that? Or would you be like, yeah, this isn't good. This isn't going to be a good thing, this isn't why I would want to be introduced to these men and have them see me this way. So it'd be interesting. I look forward to the comments that you have on this section here. So this is a problem, because technically she's in a violation of a commandment of the king. And to violate a commandment of the king is practically capital punishment. I mean, it's almost there. Some kingdoms, it was capital punishment. Some, depending upon what it was, you had a little bit of leeway in there. But usually the law was you basically don't go against what the king says. Verse 13, then the king said to the wise men which knew the times, for so was the king's manner toward all that knew law and judgment. So he's relying on these men who understand the laws and rules and customs and traditions that they have. Verse 14, and the next unto him was Karshina, Shethar, Admatha, Tarshish, Meres, Marsena, and Memucan, the 7 princes of Persia and Media, which saw the king's face, and which sat the first in the kingdom. So they are like just below the king as far as power and authority goes. So verse 15, what shall we do unto the queen Vashti according to law? Because she hath not performed the commandment of the king Ahasuerus by the chamberlains. And Memucan answered before the king and the princes, Vashti the queen hath not done wrong to the king only, but also to all the princes, and to all the people that are in all the provinces of the king Ahasuerus. So this guy, Memucan, is saying this isn't just a problem for the king. This is a greater problem for everything, for the whole kingdom, basically. And this is why, verse 17, for this deed of the queen shall come abroad unto all women, so that they shall despise their husbands in their eyes, when it shall be reported, the king Ahasuerus commanded Vashti the queen to be brought in before him, but she came not. Likewise shall the ladies of Persia and Media say this day unto all the king's princes, which have heard of the deed of the queen, thus shall there arise too much contempt and wrath. So his philosophy here is this is not just a problem for the king. I mean, we're not just talking about, the queen is not doing what the king says. He's saying, here's the problem. If all the women in the kingdom learn that the queen is disobeying the king, that might give all the women an opportunity to disobey their husbands. And so we're going to end up with this chaotic revolt against the men. Why would he think this way? Why would this be important? Well, we could look at this from one perspective, that maybe Memucan is kind of a jerk to his wife, maybe, and so he's a little worried that maybe he's not the nicest to his wife, and he sees that, hey, there's a justification here for them to go against us. Maybe this is coming from a standpoint of there could be a bit of uh, not an uprising, but there could be an encouragement for women to stand up and do more, to be more involved and more active. Some societies back then allowed women to have more freedoms and more opportunities. Like Egypt was a common one that women had more of a role in everything over there. But in most of the places they didn't. Women were not allowed to do things, and they had to everything had to run through their husband. Even in the Middle East today, we see that women can't do anything without a man with her or a man making the decision for her or things like that. So he's worried that this is going to turn into a bigger problem, and women are going to want to have more freedoms and more opportunities because of this. They're going to see this as an opportunity to protest, and this could turn into a bigger problem for the whole kingdom. So it's just interesting that, throughout history, this has been a problem. I would say this isn't a problem for a bad reason. I think it's a problem because we have a tendency in history to not follow the truth, if you will. Allowing women equality is the truth and is more correct as far as truth and true principles go. So there's always going to be that encouragement to go that way, basically. So if you like, put in the comments what you think about this debate, this challenge that they're having in here, and what you think of it. Let's go to verse 19. If it please the king, let there go a royal commandment from him, and let it be written among the laws of the Persians and the Medes, that it not be altered, that Vashti come no more before King Ahasuerus, and let the king give her royal estate unto another that is better than she. So they are asking here basically to say, look, we're going to basically change the rule, have the king put this edict out there, and it's going to not just be the king's opinion or the king's idea. They're going to put it among the laws. They are going to codify this, that if a queen disobeys the king, the queen can basically lose her rights completely as the queen and give up her estate, which is the wealth of being a queen. She has to give all that up so that somebody else can be brought in as queen. And so that's basically what they're talking about here. In fact, in commentary on the Old Testament, it says, an edict issued by the king entered among the laws of the Persians and Medes and sealed with the royal signet does not pass away, i.e., it remains in force and is irrevocable. Counsellors press for the issue of such an edict for the purpose of making it impossible to the king to take Vashti again into favor, lest they should experience her vengeance on the restoration of her influence. So they're looking at this going, we can't just punish the queen. What they're saying is, we want to make it so she can't come back. Because you think about it, if we punish the queen and then Ahasuerus says, I still love her, let's bring her back. Now she's queen again. Anybody who tried to punish her the first time could be in a place of getting, she could be in retribution against them, basically. So they're going, if she's out, she's got to stay out. So we're going to put this decree that when a king pushes a queen to the side, she's gone. There's no way back, basically. So that's what they're doing. Verse 20, and when the king's decree, which he shall make, shall be published throughout all his empire, for it is great, all the wives shall give to their husbands honor, both to great and small. So this is, again, not so much an edict about a king and a queen, but more of a husband versus wife, man, woman type thing, that the women have to revere the men and have to give the honor to the men, and women need to subject themselves to their husbands, those kinds of things. That's what's going on here, basically. So I'm definitely looking forward to hearing your comments about this chapter and what you think about these policies and what's going on with them. And this is why it's so important that we have women's opinions and ideas, because they get a different perspective. We see most of history through the man's perspective of being the leader, but we don't see the women's perspective of being the follower, which is a check and a balance on the man. So we need to have that other perspective in there, and that's why it's so nice to have scriptures and stories about women in here. Verse 21, and the saying pleased the king and the princes, and the king did according to the word of Memucan. For he sent letters into all the king's provinces, and to every province according to the writing thereof, and to every people after their language, that every man should bear rule in his own house, that it should be published according to the language of every people. So through the whole edict, from India all the way through Ethiopia, in everybody's language, it goes out there that this is established rule, that the man rules the house. Everybody has to follow what the man says. He has ultimate authority. No one can overstep him, except for like kings and princes and stuff, from a governmental standpoint. But from a male-female standpoint, men are always put up at a higher pedestal than the women, kind of thing. So look forward to reading those comments you have on there. Let's jump over to chapter 2 to continue this story.